Some people measure their lives in grand achievements, in roaring crowds and glittering milestones. I have always measured mine in the spaces between the noise. The quiet hush of a library at 3 p.m., when the last bell has rung and only the dust motes dance in the slants of sunlight. The steady, rhythmic sound of my own breathing as I shelve returned copies of Austen and Orwell. The comfortable weight of our old golden retriever, Sam, resting his head on my foot as I grade papers at the kitchen table. For 10 years, my life was a symphony of these quiet notes. The conductor of my world was my husband, Mark. Where I was softness and quiet corners, he was sharp angles and ambitious energy. A financial advisor, he lived in a world of projections, growth charts, and the relentless pursuit of optimization. He wore suits that cost more than my monthly salary and had a smile that could simultaneously charm and intimidate. I was his anchor, he told me often in our early years. The calm center that grounded his storm. Our bungalow, with its slightly overgrown garden and shelves bowing under the weight of books, was my masterpiece. It was a home, not a showroom. There was always a faint smell of old paper, fresh coffee, and the lavender-scented detergent I used. Mark called it my signature scent. He said it smelled like peace. Lately, though, the peace felt thin, stretched. It began subtly, with comments wrapped in the soft paper of concern. "You're still packing a tuna sandwich, B?" he'd ask, kissing my forehead as he headed out the door. "My new associate, his wife, is a nutritionist. She preps these incredible kale and quinoa bowls, all organic. We should think about our fuel." Or, "That cardigan is so cozy on you. But remember that silk blouse we bought, the emerald one? It really makes your eyes pop. You should wear it more." Then he discovered Seraphina. He showed me her Instagram feed one night, his eyes alight with a strange fervor. "Look at this, B. This is what I'm talking about. Intentional living." I looked. The woman on the screen was ethereal. Skin like porcelain, hair the color of rich espresso falling in perfect waves. She was poised in a sun-drenched, all-white living room, holding a mug of something that was probably turmeric-infused. The caption read, "Morning ritual, gratitude, green juice, and setting the vibrational tone for a high-frequency day. Elevated living consciousness." "She's a wellness influencer," Mark said, as if introducing a revolutionary concept. She built an entire brand around optimizing every aspect of her life. Her mind, her body, her environment. It's incredible. I looked from the flawless, filtered image on his phone to my own reflection in the dark screen of the television. I saw a woman with kind eyes, a few fine lines beginning to trace their history at their corners, and hair pulled back in a simple, messy bun. I was wearing my favorite faded university sweatshirt. I felt a pang of something sharp and unfamiliar. Inadequacy. Our 10th wedding anniversary was in 2 weeks. I decided to fight back with sentiment. I secretly booked a weekend at the Willow Creek Inn, the same little mountain retreat where he'd gotten down on one knee, his hands shaking, a decade ago. It was rustic, romantic, and filled with the ghosts of our younger, less complicated selves. I packed a picnic basket with a bottle of champagne, his favorite aged cheddar, and the sourdough bread from the bakery he loved. I was going to remind him of what we were, of the beauty in our unoptimized history. The night before we were to leave, he came home late. The air around him crackled with self-importance. "B," he said, his voice heavy with gravitas, "we have a situation." My heart immediately clenched. "What's wrong? Is it your dad?" "Worse, the Henderson account. They're flying in from Zurich for an unscheduled top-level strategy session. This weekend. It's a 7-figure account, Bianca, the biggest of my career. I can't say no." The disappointment was a cold stone dropping into the pit of my stomach. "But Mark, the inn. I booked it, for our anniversary." He came to me then, cupping my face in his hands. His touch felt practiced. "I know, my love, I'm devastated, but this is the price of the future we want. This is for us asterisk. We'll go next month, I promise." He sounded so sincere. The part of me that had loved and trusted him for a decade wanted to believe him, but a newer, smaller voice whispered a warning. The following Monday, my friend and colleague, Sarah, cornered me by the photocopier. "Saw your handsome husband on Saturday night," she trilled. "At the aviary, no less. Who was he winning and dining? Must have been a very important client. The Aviary, the most exclusive restaurant in the city, the one with the 6-month waiting list, the one I had wistfully shown him a magazine article about, saying, "Wouldn't it be amazing to go there one day?" A cold numbness spread through my limbs. I went home that afternoon and with fingers that felt thick and clumsy, logged into our joint bank account. I scanned the recent transactions, and there it was, a charge from the Aviary for $487.62 on Saturday night. He hadn't been in a boardroom. He'd been in a temple of gastronomy, and he hadn't been with a client from Zurich. The foundation of my quiet symphony cracked, and the first discordant note echoed through the halls of my life. I decided to approach the confrontation as I would any research project. I gathered my evidence. I printed the bank statement. I was calm, methodical. I would present the facts, and he would have to provide an explanation. He came home, loosening his tie, already launching into a story about market volatility. I stood in the doorway to the living room, the printed paper in my hand. "We need to talk," I said, my voice surprisingly steady. He stopped, his eyes flicking from my face to the paper. "What's this?" "A receipt from the Aviary on Saturday night." I held it out. "Sarah saw you there." The transformation was instantaneous. The charming, confident facade didn't just crack, it evaporated. His shoulders slumped, not in guilt, but in what looked like resignation. As if he'd been waiting for this and was almost relieved it was over. "Let's sit down, Bianca," he said, walking past me to the kitchen table. He pulled out a chair for me, the gesture feeling obscenely formal. We sat. The table where we'd shared countless meals, where we'd laughed over burnt pancakes and celebrated promotions, now felt like a negotiation table. "I'm not going to insult your intelligence by lying," he began, steepling his fingers. "I wasn't with a client." The admission, so blunt, stole the air from my lungs. "Then who?" I managed to whisper. He didn't answer directly. Instead, he launched into a speech that sounded like it had been rehearsed in front of a mirror. "Bianca, we need to have a conversation about our long-term alignment." "Our what?" "Our life trajectories," he said, his voice taking on the cadence of a corporate presenter. "When we got married, our vectors were congruent. We wanted similar things, but a decade is a significant time frame. I've been on a path of intense personal and professional growth. I'm optimizing, striving for peak performance in every facet of my life. And you," he paused, his gaze sweeping over me from my simple blouse to my practical flats. "You have found a state of contentment. And there is nothing inherently wrong with contentment, Bianca. It's a perfectly valid operating system for a certain tier of existence." I stared at him, my mind struggling to parse the cold, robotic language. "Operating system," I repeated, the words feeling alien on my tongue. "You're good enough one," he said, and there was a terrifying lack of malice in his voice. It was a simple, clinical diagnosis. "And I've upgraded my hardware. I need an operating system that can keep up. I need exceptional too." The absurdity of it was a shield against the immediate pain. He wasn't leaving me for another woman. He was executing a systems migration. I was being deprecated. "Who is she?" I asked, my voice hollow. "Her name is Seraphina," he said, and for the first time, a flicker of genuine emotion crossed his face. Something like awe. "She understands the architecture of a high-performance life. She's my upgrade." He moved out that weekend. The process was chillingly efficient. He took his suits, his collection of expensive watches, his high-tech toothbrush, and his Peloton. He left me the books, the dog, the slightly lumpy sofa we'd bought together, and the devastating, soul-crushing feeling of being declared obsolete. A month later, the official announcement came. It was a black and white photograph on Instagram. 2 perfectly manicured hands intertwined. Her hand, slender and adorned with a massive, square-cut diamond. His hand, with the watch I'd given him for our 5th anniversary. The caption from his account read, "When you find a soul whose frequency matches your ambition, an upgrade in every sense, blessed Seraphina." I sat on the floor of our half-empty living room, Sam whining softly and resting his head in my lap. I scrolled through the comments, a chorus of heart emojis and congratulatory messages from his colleagues, his college friends, people I'd considered our friends. Finally found your queen. Power couple goals. What an upgrade, man. So happy for you. Each comment was a tiny, precise incision. He hadn't just left me. He had framed my entire existence as a buggy, outdated piece of software, and his followers were celebrating the new release. I was not just heartbroken. I was publicly, humiliatingly devalued. The months that followed were a gray, muted landscape. I functioned. I went to work. The library was a sanctuary of predictable order. The Dewey Decimal System didn't care about my personal life. I came home. I walked Sam. I ate toast for dinner because cooking felt like a Herculean task. The divorce papers arrived. I signed them without reading, the ink feeling like acid on the page. My friend Sarah tried to pull me out of it. "You're better off, B. He's a monster, a narcissist," she'd say, her voice fierce with protective anger. But she didn't understand. It wasn't the narcissism that crippled me. It was the conviction in his eyes when he'd called me good enough one. He truly believed it, and a treacherous part of me had started to believe it too. I made a conscious decision to stop looking at social media. It was a form of digital self-preservation. I deleted the apps from my phone. The world of curated perfection and vicious commentary was a poison I could no longer afford. But the universe, and Sarah's relentless vigilance, ensured I wasn't completely insulated. "B," she said on the phone one evening, her tone a strange mix of outrage and glee. "You need to brace yourself. She's pregnant." The words were a physical blow. I sank onto the sofa, my legs suddenly weak. "What?" Asterisk her asterisk. Seraphina. It's a whole production. It's not just a pregnancy, it's a content strategy. A cold, hollow ache opened up inside me. It wasn't jealousy for Mark. That particular wound had scabbed over into a dull scar. This was something else, something deeper and more primal. It was the death of a future I hadn't even realized I was still clinging to. The vague, someday dream of a child. Of reading Goodnight Moon in this very living room, of packing slightly misshapen sandwiches for a school lunchbox, of a love that was messy and real and gloriously unoptimized. He had taken that abstract future and given it to her. He was building his perfect, optimized family. Against my every instinct, I re-downloaded Instagram. I found her profile. The pregnancy was a masterclass in personal branding. There were tasteful, silken robe-clad maternity shoots in fields of lavender. Videos of Mark, now tanned and wearing soft, expensive-looking linen, reading the art of the deal to her perfectly smooth, round belly. Posts about curating a toxin-free womb environment, prenatal vibrational alignment through sound healing, and designing a nursery that fosters early-stage cognitive optimization. They were building a superhuman, a perfect product of their perfect union. I felt a sob rise in my throat, but I choked it down. I would not cry over this. I closed the app, my hand trembling. I deleted it again, this time for good. The chasm of loss inside me felt bottomless. Slowly, achingly slowly, I began to rebuild. It wasn't a dramatic transformation. It was the quiet, stubborn work of putting one foot in front of the other. I started painting again. I'd minored in art in college, but had let it fall by the wayside. I set up a small easel in the corner of the living room, where Mark's ugly modernist chair used to be. I painted abstract things, swirls of color that reflected my mood. Dark, stormy grays and blues at first, then gradually, hints of gold and green began to emerge. I started saying, yes, when Sarah invited me out for coffee. I reconnected with a few old friends who had been pushed to the periphery during my marriage to Mark. And I met David. He was the new history teacher at the high school, his classroom right next to the library. He was the antithesis of Mark. Where Mark was polished and sharp, David was rumpled and soft-spoken. He had kind eyes that crinkled at the corners when he smiled, and a perpetually loose thread on his tweed jacket. Our first interaction was over a stack of books on the Tudor dynasty he'd requested. "You must be Bianca," he'd said, his voice a warm, quiet rumble. The students say you're the heart of this place. It was such a simple, genuine compliment. Not about my potential or my utility, but about my essence. We started talking. He'd come by the library at the end of the day, and we'd discuss anything from the War of the Roses to the best way to make a cup of tea. He didn't have an Instagram account. He thought optimization was something you did to a car engine. He liked my cozy cardigans and brought me a china mug from a second-hand shop because he thought it would be perfect for my afternoon Earl Grey. It was gentle, it was easy, it was real. 6 months after Seraphina's baby was born, Sarah sent me a screenshot. It was a grainy still from a live video Seraphina was doing, demonstrating a postpartum abdominal rejuvenation routine. In the background, Mark was holding the baby, a boy they'd named Atlas. Sarah's message was simple. He's a beautiful baby, but does he look different to you? I zoomed in on the image. Atlas was indeed a beautiful child with rosy cheeks, but Sarah was right. There was something off. He had a shock of fine, almost white blonde hair and wide-set eyes of a startling cerulean blue. Mark had thick, dark brown hair and deep-set brown eyes. Seraphina was a brunette with hazel eyes. A cold, clinical part of my brain, the part that had helped me survive the initial betrayal, kicked into gear. Genetics. Dominant and recessive traits. The odds of 2 brunettes with brown hazel eyes producing a platinum blonde with bright blue eyes were statistically improbable. I felt a strange, unsettling tremor in the universe. This wasn't my drama. I had my painting, my dog, my quiet conversations with David. I was building a new life, brick by quiet brick. I wanted no part of their crumbling palace. But the seed of truth had been planted. The call came on a rainy Tuesday evening. I was curled up on the sofa, a blanket over my legs, gratting a stack of freshman book reports on To Kill a Mockingbird *. Sam was snoring at my feet, and David had just left after bringing over a container of his famously mediocre, but heartfelt, homemade chili. The name that flashed on my screen sent a jolt through my entire system. Mark. My first instinct was to let it go to voicemail, to let the ghost of my past life fade away. But a deeper, more primal curiosity, the same instinct that makes people slow down to look at a car crash, made me press the green button. Bianca, his voice was unfamiliar. It was stripped of its polished confidence, thin and frayed at the edges like worn-out silk. Mark, what is it? A long, shaky exhale. In the background, I could hear the faint, frantic wail of a baby. It's Atlas. My heart clenched, a purely instinctual sympathy for the innocent child. Is he okay? Is he sick? He's fine, he's healthy, it's just... He lowered his voice to a desperate, conspiratorial whisper. People are talking, B. At the club, at the firm. My partner, Jim, made a joke about the pool boy yesterday. My mother keeps asking if we're sure they didn't switch bobbies at the hospital. I said nothing. I let the silence stretch, a heavy, uncomfortable weight for him to carry. Seraphina says it's just a phase, that all bobbies are born with light hair and blue eyes. She says he'll darken up. But you were always the observant one, the logical one. Did you ever, when you looked at her photos, did you notice anything off? The irony was so profound, it was almost beautiful. He was calling me asterisk, the obsolete operating system, to run a diagnostic on his new premium model. Genetics are fascinating, aren't they, Mark? I said, my voice calm, and even the voice I used with anxious students. They're the one algorithm that's blissfully immune to optimization. The source code always reveals itself. What does that mean? He demanded, his voice rising in panic. What are you saying? I'm saying that life has a compiler. And sometimes, no matter how perfect your syntax looks, the output doesn't match your expectations. I ended the call. My hand was perfectly steady. I looked around my cozy, book-filled living room, at Sam's trusting face, at the half-finished painting on my easel, a vibrant, joyful explosion of yellow. For the first time since he had left, I didn't feel like good enough one. I felt like the system administrator who had just watched the shiny new software crash, knowing my own humble, reliable code was still running smoothly. The fallout was a public execution by gossip. Sarah, my relentless news feed, kept me updated. Driven by paranoia and the mounting social humiliation, Mark had bought a home DNA test kit. The results came back with brutal binary finality, *0, 0% probability of paternity. The scandal was nuclear. Seraphina, it was revealed, had been having a concurrent alignment with her personal trainer, a man named Lars. Photos of Lars surfaced, a Nordic god with a sculpted physique, a jawline you could cut glass with, and a head of thick, white blonde hair. The resemblance to baby Atlas was uncanny and undeniable. Mark's perfectly curated world imploded. The upgraded hashtag was resurrected as a cruel joke. The photo of him reading to Seraphina's belly was memed with captions like, "Optimizing another man's legacy." He became a figure of pity and mockery, the man who had traded in his devoted, real wife for a fraudulent goddess and a cuckoo's egg. He called me one last time. His voice was a shattered ruin of its former self, slurred and thick with what smelled like bourbon through the phone line. "You knew," he accused, the word dripping with a pathetic mix of anger and self-pity. "You saw it from the beginning." "I saw that the user interface was beautiful, Mark," I said softly, not without a trace of pity. "But I suspected the architecture was flawed. You were so obsessed with the branding, you forgot to check the integrity of the product." There was a long silence, broken only by his ragged breathing. "My life, it's over. Everything I built." "No," I corrected him, my voice firm. "The life you performed is over. The one you built on a filter and a lie. There's a difference." I didn't wait for a reply. I hit the end button on the screen, and then, with a sense of profound finality, I blocked his number. The last thread connecting me to that painful, absurd chapter of my life was severed. The closure was quiet, and it was complete. Today, my life is not optimized. It is not upgraded. It is authentic. I live in a sun-drenched apartment that overlooks a park. I still work at the library, but now my paintings sell in a little co-op downtown. David is a constant, gentle presence. He doesn't talk about life trajectories or vibrational frequencies. He talks about the migratory patterns of monarch butterflies and the history of the printing press. He makes terrible puns that make me groan and then laugh, a real, uncurated laugh that comes from my belly. He loves me for my quiet mind, for the way I organize my books by color, for my loyalty to Sam, and for the simple, unoptimized fact of my existence. We are talking about moving in together. The thought doesn't terrify me. It feels like the next, natural verse in a song I actually want to sing. Sometimes, when I'm walking Sam in the park, the golden light of late afternoon filtering through the leaves, I think of Mark and Seraphina. Not with anger or schadenfreude, but with a distant, quiet sense of tragedy. They built a glittering palace on a foundation of sand and mirrors, and they were genuinely shocked when the tide came in. They believed in the illusion of perfection. They worshipped at the altar of the upgrade. But life has taught me a simple, unshakable truth. You cannot upgrade from what is real. He left me for a beautifully rendered hologram, and in the end, all he was left with was the empty, silent space between the pixels. My life is not a viral post. It is not a trending hashtag. It is a quiet, deeply satisfying, and perfectly imperfect story. And for the first time in a very, very long time, I am not just the narrator. I am the author, the protagonist, and the truly, deeply happy ending.